lies just as much in the way it responds to the currents of wind, in the swaying of its branches and the rustling of its leaves, then we might wonder whether the tree can be anything other than a tree in the air. Now, these considerations lead me to conclude that the tree is not an object at all, but a certain gathering together of the threads of life. And that's what I mean by a thing. And in this I follow, albeit rather loosely, the argument classically advanced by the philosopher Martin Heidegger in his celebrated essay on the thing, in which he's at pains to figure out precisely what makes a thing different from an object. The object stands before us as a fait accompli, presenting its congealed outer surfaces to our inspection. It's defined by its very over-againstness in relation to the setting in which it's placed. The thing, by contrast, is a going-on, or better perhaps, a place where several goings-on become entwined. To observe a thing is not to be locked out, but to be invited into the gathering. We participate, as Heidegger rather enigmatically put it, in the thing's thinging in a worlding world. There is, of course, a precedent for this view of the thing as a gathering in the ancient meaning of the word, as a place where people would meet to resolve their affairs. And if we think of every participant as following a particular way of life, threading a line through the world, then perhaps we could define the thing, as I've suggested elsewhere, as a parliament of lines. Thus conceived, the thing takes the form not of an externally bounded entity set over and against the world, but of a knot whose constituent threads, far from being contained within it, trail beyond, only to become caught up with other threads in other knots. Or in a word, things leak, forever discharging through the surfaces that temporarily form around them. I'm going to return to that point in connection with the importance, which I'll discuss later, of following the flows of materials. But for now, let's just continue with our walk outside. We've observed the tree, so what else might catch our attention? I stubbed my foot on a stone lying on the path. Well, surely you'll say the stone is an object. Yet it's so only if we artificially cut it out from the processes of erosion and deposition that brought it there and lent it the size and shape that it presently has. A rolling stone, the proverb says, gathers no moss. Yet, in the very process of gathering moss, the stone that's wedged in place becomes a thing, while on the other hand, the stone that rolls, like a pebble washed by a running river, becomes a thing in its very rolling. Just as the tree, responding in its movements to the currents of wind, is a tree in the air, so the stone rolling in the river current is a stone in the water. Suppose then that we cast our eyes skywards. It's a fine day, but there are, unlike today, a few clouds. Are clouds objects? Well, rather oddly, Gibson thinks they are. They seem for him to hang in the sky, while other entities like trees and stones lie on the earth. So the entire environment, in Gibson's words, consists of the earth and the sky, with objects on the earth and in the sky. The painter René Magritte cleverly parodied this view of the furnished sky. I've got it here, by depicting the cloud as a flying object floating in through the open door of an otherwise empty room. Of course, the cloud is not really an object, but a vaporous tumescence that swells as it is carried along in the currents of air. To observe the clouds, I've written elsewhere, is not to view the furniture of the sky, but to catch a fleeting glimpse of a sky in formation, never the same from one moment to the next. Once again, clouds are not objects, but things. So what goes for such things as trees, stones, and clouds, which might have grown or formed with little or no human intervention, also applies to more obviously artificial structures. Consider a building, not the fixed and final structure of the architect's design, but the actual building, resting on its foundations in the earth, buffeted by the elements, and susceptible to the visitations of birds, rodents, arachnids, and fungi. The distinguished Portuguese architect Álvaro Siza has admitted that he has never been able to build a real house, by which he means, this is his words, a complicated machine in which every day something breaks down. The real house is never finished. Rather, for its inhabitants, it calls for unremitting effort to shore it up in the face of the comings and goings of its manifold human and non-human inhabitants, not to mention the weather. Rainwater drips through the roof where the wind has blown off a tile, feeding a fungal growth that threatens to decompose the timbers. The gutters are full of rotten leaves, and if that wasn't enough, moans Caesar, legions of ants invade the thresholds of doors. There are always the dead bodies of birds, mice, and cats. Indeed, not unlike the tree, the real house is a gathering of lives, and to inhabit it is to join in the gathering, or in Heidegger's terms, to participate with the thing in its thinging. Our most fundamental architectural experiences, as the Finnish architect Juhani Palasmaa explains, are verbal rather than nominal in form. They consist not of encounters with objects, like the facade, the door frame, the window, the fireplace, but of acts of approaching and entering, of looking in or out, and soaking up the warmth of the hearth. So as inhabitants, in short, we experience the house not as an object, but as a thing. So what have we learnt from throwing open the windows of the study, leaving the house, and taking a walk outside? Have we encountered an environment that is as cluttered with objects as is my study with furniture, books, and utensils? Far from it. Indeed, there seem to be no objects at all. To be sure, there are swellings, growths, outcrops, filaments, ruptures, and cavities, but not objects. Though we might occupy a world full of objects, to the occupant the contents of the world appear already locked into their final forms, closed in upon themselves. It's as if they'd turned their backs on us. To inhabit the world, by contrast, is to join in the processes of formation. And the world that thus opens up to the inhabitants is fundamentally an environment without objects, or as I shall call it for short, and with a bit of a pun on Deleuze and Guattari, I shall call it the EWO. Describing the tree, the stone, the cloud, and the building, I've sought to give an account of life in the EWO. Now, for Gibson, you'll recall, an environment devoid of objects could be nothing but a featureless and perfectly level desert. Only when objects are added, whether laid out on the ground or hung up in the sky, does an environment, in his terms, become livable. So how have we arrived at such a contrary conclusion, namely that an environment populated with objects can be occupied but not inhabited? What marks the distance between Gibson's view and my own? And the answer lies in our respective understandings of the significance of surfaces. It's by their outward surfaces, according to Gibson, that objects are revealed to perception. Every surface, as he explains, is an interface between the more or less solid substance of an object and the volatile medium that surrounds it. If the substance dissolves or evaporates into the medium, then the surface disappears, and with it the object it once enveloped. So the very objectness of an entity lies in the separation and immiscibility of substance and medium. Remove every object, however, and a surface still remains, for Gibson the most fundamental surface of all, namely the ground, marking the interface between the substance of the earth below and the gaseous medium of the sky above. So has the earth turned its back on the sky? If it had, then as Gibson correctly surmised, no life would be possible. The open environment could not be inhabited. But my argument to the contrary is that the world of the open can be inhabited precisely because wherever life is going on, the interfacial separation of earth and sky gives way